The Calloway family Thanksgiving had a seating order and everyone knew it. Vanessa sat at Dad's right hand. He always had. From the time we were children, that chair, the one closest to the head of the table, the one where Dad could lean over and whisper proud things into your ear, belonged to my sister. I had learned somewhere around age 9 to stop trying to sit there. Mom would redirect me before I even pulled out the chair. That's Vanessa's spot, Reagan. You know that. I knew that. I knew a lot of things by the time I was 31 years old and driving my rental car through the hill country toward my parents' house in Kerrville, Texas, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I knew the seating order. I knew the conversational order. Dad would lead, Vanessa would perform, Mom would beam, and I would answer direct questions politely and otherwise remain scenery. I knew that my cousin Bethany would make a passive comment about my apartment before the sweet potato casserole was served. I knew that Uncle Roy would ask when I was getting married, and that nobody would ask Vanessa the same question, even though she'd been dating the same man for 4 years. I knew all of it. I had memorized the architecture of my own smallness in that house. What I hadn't decided, driving through the cedar breaks with the November sun going orange on my left, was whether this would be the last time I participated in it. Grandma Loretta had died 14 months ago. She'd gone quietly in her sleep, in the house on Mockingbird Lane in San Antonio that she'd owned since 1987. She was 79 years old and entirely sharp until the end, and she had spent the last 3 years of her life doing something that nobody in my family knew about except me and her estate attorney, a meticulous man named Gerald Okafor who operated out of a small office near the Pearl District. Grandma Loretta had been watching. That was how she'd described it to me, the afternoon in September 2020 when she'd called me into her living room, turned off the television, and told me she had something important to discuss. "I've been watching this family for a long time, Reagan," she said, folding her hands in her lap the way she did when she was serious. "And I want to talk to you about what I see." What she saw was a woman who had built something real and been systematically erased for it. What she saw was her younger granddaughter, dismissed at every table, overlooked at every milestone, spoken over in every room, while quietly without fanfare, building a property management career from a single assistant position into a regional director role overseeing 43 units across 2 Texas cities. What she saw was Vanessa, who had managed Grandma Loretta's 8 rental properties in San Antonio for the past 4 years, submitting monthly reports that didn't quite add up, collecting management fees she hadn't disclosed, and letting maintenance requests slide on properties she found inconvenient to deal with. Grandma Loretta had hired a bookkeeper in early 2020 to review 3 years of rental records. She had not told Vanessa. She had not told my parents. She had told me that September afternoon what the bookkeeper had found. And then she had told me what she intended to do about it. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:14 in the evening. The house was lit up warm and gold through the windows. I could see movement in the kitchen. Mom and Vanessa probably arranging things, the two of them moving in the synchronized way they always had, like a choreography I had never been invited to learn. I sat in the car for a moment. I thought about Gerald Okafor. I thought about the folder in my bag. Then I went inside. Let me tell you who I was so you understand what they were dismissing. I graduated from the University of Texas at San Antonio with a degree in business administration and a minor in real estate finance. I was not celebrated for this. Vanessa had graduated from UT Austin the year before. The flagship campus, the one Dad had gone to, the one that mattered, and my graduation had been attended by my parents with the energy of people completing an obligation. There were no parties. There were no framed photos on the fireplace mantel. There was a dinner at a chain restaurant and a card with $50 in it. I started working at a property management firm in San Antonio 3 weeks after graduation. Entry level. I answered phones, processed maintenance requests, and learned how every system in a managed property worked from the ground up. My supervisor, a woman named Carmen Vasquez, recognized early that I had a specific kind of mind for this work. Detail-oriented, patient, capable of holding large amounts of information without confusion. She promoted me twice in 18 months. By the time I was 26, I was managing a portfolio of 12 residential properties independently. By 28, I was a senior property manager overseeing a team of 4. By 30, I had been recruited away by a larger firm, Meridian Residential Partners, and given the title of regional director for their Central Texas portfolio, which included 43 units across San Antonio and Austin. My salary was $127,000. I had a 401k in good shape and a reputation in the industry that had earned me an invitation to speak at the Texas Apartment Association conference 2 years running. I had never mentioned any of this at my parents' dinner table in any meaningful way. Not because I was hiding it, I had tried early on to share it. But there is a particular kind of silence that a family can produce when you speak. A silence that communicates not absence of sound but absence of interest, and I had learned to recognize it. My achievements produced that silence. Vanessa's achievements, her marketing job, her social media presence, her ability to make Dad laugh, produced warmth, questions, follow-up. So I stopped offering. I answered what was asked and said nothing more. Meanwhile, Grandma Loretta was paying attention. She had always been different from the rest of them. She was my father's mother, which meant that technically she should have favored him, favored his golden daughter, favored the version of the family story that painted Vanessa as the capable one. But Grandma Loretta had built her own things. She had purchased her first rental property in 1979 with money she'd saved from 15 years of bookkeeping work. She had built her portfolio to 8 properties over 3 decades of careful, unglamorous work. She understood from her own life what it looked like when someone was doing the real thing quietly. She recognized it in me. We had developed our closeness gradually, over Sunday phone calls and visits I made without being asked, while Vanessa's visits had become increasingly contingent on what she needed. After Grandpa passed in 2017, I was the one who helped Grandma Loretta sort his paperwork. I was the one who found the lease on the Olmos Park property had lapsed and needed renewal. I was the one who drove to San Antonio on a random Tuesday in March to help her deal with a plumbing crisis at the Blanco Road duplex when Vanessa, who was supposed to be managing it, didn't answer her phone. "You don't make a fuss," Grandma Loretta told me once. "You just show up and fix it." I had come to understand, the highest compliment she knew how to give. Grandma Loretta's bookkeeper was named Philip Serrano, and he had been working in estate accounting for 22 years. Grandma hired him in February 2020, gave him access to 4 years of property records, and told him to reconcile everything independently without contacting Vanessa or my parents. He worked for 3 months. His report was 41 pages. Grandma walked me through the summary that September afternoon with her reading glasses on and her voice perfectly steady, the way she was steady when she was most upset. The rental income discrepancies began in 2017, the year Vanessa had taken over management. Small at first, a few $100s a month in inconsistencies, the kind of thing that might be written off as rounding errors or minor accounting differences. But they accumulated. And as the years passed, they grew less subtle. Vanessa had been collecting full rent from tenants and reporting partial amounts to Grandma. She had been invoicing for maintenance work that was either never performed or billed at rates 2 and 3 times the actual cost, using a handyman who, Philip discovered after some digging, was her boyfriend's brother. She had charged a property management fee of 12%, a fee Grandma had never formally agreed to, every month for 4 years. The total discrepancy across all 8 properties from January 2017 through December 2020 was $287,400. Nearly $300,000. Grandma sat quietly after she finished walking me through it. She took off her glasses. She looked at the middle distance for a moment. "I'm not going to confront her," she said finally. "Not yet. Not the way your father would want me to, making a scene, giving her a chance to explain it away, watching your mother defend her." She looked at me. "I'm going to protect what I built. And I'm going to make sure it goes where it should go." Gerald Okafor had already been called. Over the next 4 months, Grandma Loretta transferred all 8 San Antonio rental properties to me through a combination of quit-claim deeds and an irrevocable trust structure that Gerald designed specifically to withstand challenge. Each property was transferred individually. Each transfer was properly recorded with the Behar County Clerk's office. The trust was funded, documented, and sealed. Grandma called me in January 2021. After the last deed was filed. "It's done," she said. "Gerald has your copies. The originals are filed. There is nothing your father or sister can do to undo this. I checked with 2 other attorneys to be sure." She paused. "Take care of those properties the way they deserve to be taken care of," she said. "I know you will." She died 11 months later. I was with her. The properties had been generating income in my name for 14 months by the time I drove into my parents' driveway for Thanksgiving. I had retained Meridian's maintenance team to handle the units properly. All 8 were fully leased. 3 had undergone renovations I'd funded from reserves Vanessa had depleted. The Olmos Park property, which had been chronically underperforming, was now generating $2,800 a month. My parents did not know any of this. Vanessa, who had continued collecting rent on properties she no longer legally managed, because she apparently hadn't checked the county records, was about to find out. The dinner table seated 14. Mom had outdone herself the way she always did. Turkey and 3 kinds of side dishes, the good china, candles. Vanessa had brought a store-bought pie and received a round of applause for it. I had brought a handmade pecan pie from a bakery I'd driven 45 minutes out of my way to visit, because Grandma Loretta had loved pecan pie, and I had set it quietly on the counter without announcing it. No one mentioned it until dessert when Mom said, "Oh, who brought this?" and served it without waiting for an answer. The meal progressed predictably. Dad held court at the head of the table. Uncle Roy asked about my love life within the first 15 minutes and then moved on. Cousin Bethany mentioned that she'd seen a cute little apartment complex in my neighborhood, and wasn't that near where I lived? Vanessa talked about a marketing campaign she was leading at work and received rapt attention. I ate my turkey and watched. I had made a decision in the car the day before. Not an angry decision, I want to be clear about that. The anger had lived in me for years, but it had long since converted into something quieter and more purposeful. What I had decided somewhere in those cedar breaks was that I was done managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own truth. Grandma Loretta had not transferred 8 properties to me so that I could continue sitting at the children's end of my own inheritance. I had brought Gerald Okafor's summary folder. It was in my bag hanging on the back of my chair. I did not plan to use it unless necessary. It turned out to be necessary before the pie was served. It started with a toast. Dad stood up with his wine glass, which was the signal that he had something to say and the table should receive it with appropriate reverence. He looked down at Vanessa with that particular expression he reserved for her. Proud, proprietary, the face of a man looking at his best work. "I want to take a moment," he said, "to share some family news. Your grandmother, God rest her, built something remarkable with those San Antonio properties. 8 units. 30+ years of work. And it's important to us that they stay in family hands that will honor what she built." He raised his glass slightly higher. "Your mother and I have made a decision. Starting January 1st, all 8 rental properties will be formally transferred to Vanessa's management and ownership. She's been running them for years, she knows them, and she's earned it." Applause. Actual applause from cousins, from aunts. Uncle Roy raised his glass. Vanessa stood slightly, not fully, just a partial rise, the practiced performance of gracious acceptance. She turned to me with a smile that had something else in it, something she'd been waiting a long time to deliver. "Mom and Dad have decided. All 8 Texas rentals go to me starting January," she said, projecting for the table's benefit, making sure everyone was oriented toward us. "Reagan, frankly, you never deserved them anyway. Grandma always knew I was the one who put in the work." Dad smirked. 2 of my cousins exchanged a satisfied look. Aunt Carol nodded. I felt the familiar pull, the old instinct to shrink, to smile politely and let it pass, to protect everyone in the room from a discomfort they had never extended me the same protection from. I let it pass through me, and then I smiled. "They already are," I said. 4 words. Conversational volume. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it, and then I reached for my water glass. The table went silent in a way that was different from the usual silence. This was not the silence of disinterest. This was the silence of a room that had heard something it couldn't immediately process. Dad's fork dropped. It hit the china plate with a small clear ring that seemed very loud in the sudden quiet. Vanessa's face moved through several expressions in fast succession. Confusion, dismissal, recalculation, the beginning of something that looked like fear. "What did you just say?" she said. Her voice had gone high and sharp. I set down my water glass. I reached behind me and unzipped my bag. "I said they already are," I repeated calmly. "The properties are already mine. They have been since January 2021. I placed Gerald Okafor's summary folder on the table. I did not slide it dramatically. I set it down the way you set down something that is simply true. Grandma transferred all 8 properties to me through quit-claim deeds and an irrevocable trust. The transfers were recorded with the Behar County Clerk between October 2020 and January 2021. Gerald Okafor handled the filings. These are the recorded deed numbers. I opened the folder to the first page. A clean summary sheet Gerald had prepared, listing each property address, the date of transfer, and the recording number. Dad was on his feet. His chair had gone back fast enough to scrape the floor. He stopped. Started again. That's not possible. Mom would have told me. She told Gerald, I said. She didn't tell you because she knew what would happen if she did. This is insane, Vanessa said. She had stood up fully now. Her voice was doing something I had never heard from her. A thin, fraying quality like a rope with too much weight on it. You're lying. You forged something. Dad, she forged. The recording numbers are public record, I said. You can verify every one of them on the Behar County Appraisal District website tonight. The trust documents are with Gerald Okafor's office. He's available Monday. Mom had both hands over her mouth. Aunt Carol said very quietly, David. My father's name. Just that. Uncle Roy had put down his wine glass. Reagan. Dad's voice had changed. The smirk was entirely gone. Something older and more complicated had replaced it. Not remorse, not yet, but the face of a man encountering a wall he hadn't seen coming. Why would she do this without telling us? I looked at him for a moment. Because she hired a forensic bookkeeper in February 2020, I said. And she found out what Vanessa had been doing with the rental income. The silence that followed was a different kind entirely. Vanessa had gone the color of the white tablecloth. What are you talking about? She said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of refusal. I turned to the second section of the folder. Philip Serrano's accounting report covers January 2017 through December 2020. For years, he reconciled Grandma's actual rental income against what Vanessa reported and what she deposited into Grandma's account. I found the summary page. The total discrepancy is $287,400. That's rent collected and not remitted, inflated maintenance invoices, and an undisclosed management fee of 12% charged monthly across all 8 properties. I set the page where my father could see it. He looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Vanessa. His voice was quiet in a way I had never heard from him. Flattened. Those numbers are wrong. Vanessa's hands were on the table, gripping the edge. The bookkeeper made errors. There were legitimate expenses. The maintenance invoices were run through a company owned by Marcus's brother, I said. Marcus was her boyfriend. Gerald flagged it in the report. The invoices are in the appendix. Cousin Bethany pushed her chair back slightly as if she wanted distance from the table. $287,000, Uncle Roy said slowly. He wasn't talking to anyone in particular. Over 4 years, I confirmed. Roughly $6,000 a month. Dad sat back down. Heavily. The way a person sits when their legs have made a decision without consulting them. She had no right, he said. Almost to himself. Mom had no right to do this without. She had every right, I said, and something in my voice stopped him. Not loudness. Certainty. They were her properties. He built them. She owned them. She had every legal right to transfer them to anyone she chose, and she chose me. I didn't ask her to. I didn't suggest it. She made that decision because she watched this family for 79 years and she decided where her work should go. Mom made a sound. I couldn't fully characterize it. Grief, maybe, or the beginning of something she didn't want to look at directly. Reagan, she started. Mom. I said it gently. I'm not angry. I want you to know that. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. I'm doing this because Dad just stood up and announced a transfer of property that hasn't legally belonged to this family for almost 3 years. Someone needed to say something. Vanessa left the table at 6:47. She went upstairs. I could hear her on the phone, the specific urgent murmur of someone making calls they needed to make in private. I assumed she was calling Marcus. I assumed she was also at some point trying to verify what I'd said about the county records. The table cleared in a way that was less celebration and more dispersal. Aunt Carol took her children to the living room. Uncle Roy helped himself to more wine and said very little. The cousins who had cheered 40 minutes earlier found reasons to be elsewhere. Dad sat at the table for a long time after most people had moved. Mom sat with him. I stayed too. She'll say you manipulated Mom, Dad said eventually. She can say that, I said. The documents will say otherwise. You should have told us. I looked at him. I took a moment before I answered because I wanted to answer honestly and not cruelly. I didn't tell you because Grandma asked me not to until it was necessary, I said. And because every time I've tried to tell this family something real about my life, it gets treated like it doesn't matter. I didn't want to fight about it. I just wanted to honor what Grandma trusted me with. Dad didn't respond to that. I don't know if he heard it the way I meant it. But Mom looked up. And something in her face shifted. Small, barely perceptible, the movement of a woman who had been holding a certain story in place for a long time and had just felt it become harder to hold. She was sending you money, Mom said quietly. The last few years. I always wondered. She was sending me my portion of the rental income, I said. As the legal owner. Gerald managed the distributions. Mom nodded. Fully. She always talked about you differently, she said, more to herself than to me. I told myself it was just, she stopped. I didn't push it. Some things need space to be understood and that night was not the time. I had one more conversation before I left. Vanessa came downstairs at 9:15, composed in the deliberate way of someone who had spent 2 hours reconstructing their composure. She found me in the kitchen packing up the remains of the pecan pie. I need to talk to you, she said. Hey, I said. Whatever is in that report, there are explanations. There were expenses Grandma approved verbally that weren't always documented properly. Marcus's brother did legitimate work. This can be explained. I looked at her. My older sister. The one at Dad's right hand. The one who had taken every room I'd ever tried to occupy and made it clear there wasn't space. Then you should explain it to Gerald, I said. And probably to an attorney of your own. Reagan. Vanessa. I closed the pie container. I didn't commission the accounting report. Grandma did. I didn't record the deeds. Gerald did. I didn't create the discrepancy. You did. I picked up my bag. I've spent 31 years making myself small enough for this family to be comfortable. I'm not going to make myself small about this. I left the kitchen. Gerald Okafor sent a formal letter to my parents the following Monday, confirming the property transfers and offering to answer any questions about the documentation. He included the trust instrument, all 8 recorded deeds, and Philip Serrano's complete accounting report. My father called me that Tuesday. It was a difficult conversation. He was not ready to apologize, I didn't expect him to be, but the call itself was a kind of acknowledgement. He confirmed he'd reviewed the county records. He confirmed the deeds were real. He asked about Philip Serrano's methodology and I gave him Gerald's number. Vanessa retained an attorney within the week. Her attorney reviewed the trust documents, reviewed the deeds, and apparently advised her that the transfers were airtight. She did not pursue a legal challenge. What she did pursue, privately, was damage control with my parents. A series of explanations about the accounting discrepancies that I was told about secondhand through Mom, who had begun calling me on Sunday afternoons in a way she hadn't before. The explanations were creative. They were also, Gerald advised me, not his concern unless I chose to make them his concern. I chose to wait. Philip Serrano's report had already been shared with an attorney who specialized in fiduciary fraud cases. Whether I pursued anything further was my decision made on my timeline and I had not yet decided. What I had decided was the practical matter. I took over formal management of all 8 properties in December. I contracted with a licensed property management company, not Meridian, a conflict of interest, but a firm I had vetted personally, to handle day-to-day operations. I reviewed every lease, every maintenance record, every tenant relationship. The Blanco Road duplex had a plumbing issue that had been deferred for 8 months. I had it repaired in the first week. The combined monthly rental income from all 8 properties, properly managed, came to $31,200. Grandma Loretta had built something real. I intended to honor it. My mother calls me on Sundays. It started tentatively, short calls, weather and small talk, the careful reopening of a channel that had been narrowed by years of a particular family dynamic. But it has deepened. Last month she asked me about the properties, genuinely asked, wanted to know how they were doing and what I was planning. I told her about the Olmos Park renovation. I told her about the tenant in the Fredericksburg Road unit who'd been there 11 years and had always paid early and how I'd sent her a small holiday card. Mom was quiet for a moment after that and then she said, "That's something your grandmother would have done." I said, "I know. She taught me. My father and I are in a different place. We talk. It is not easy and it is not resolved and I have stopped expecting it to be either of those things on a schedule. He is a man who built his understanding of his family around a story that turned out to be wrong in important ways, and that kind of reckoning doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline. What I can tell you is that last month he asked me without prompting to tell him about my work at Meridian. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. It was not an apology, but it was something. Vanessa and I do not speak. That may change. It may not. I have made peace with not knowing. What I know is this. Grandma Loretta sat in her living room in September 2020 with her reading glasses on and her hands folded in her lap, and she told me she had been watching. She had watched me build something real in the quiet. She had watched my sister take what wasn't hers and call it work. She had watched my parents perform a version of fairness that was actually just favoritism with better lighting. And she had decided. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. She had taken 30 years of careful work, 8 properties, 30-plus tenants, thousands of small unglamorous decisions, and she had placed them in the hands of the person she trusted to keep building. She was right to trust me. I sat at that Thanksgiving table and said 4 words, "They already are," and I meant every one of them. Not as a weapon. As a fact. The most important facts don't need to be delivered loudly. They don't need dramatics or speeches or a raised voice. They just need to be true and patient, and documented with a recording number at the Behar County Clerk's office. Grandma Loretta taught me that too. The pecan pie, for what it's worth, was exceptional. 2 of my cousins told me so on the way out. No one brought up who made it. But I knew.